Well, welcome to the 700 Club. The Bible says they have sown the wind, and they will reap the whirlwind. We sowed the wind of defunding the police. In New York City, de Blasio took $1 billion out of the police budget. And all across the country, we talked about defunding the police. And so the police resigned in droves across America. I can't blame them. Why should they put their lives on the line if the people won't stand for them? And so they're going to take away the sovereign immunity they had and make them liable to civil suits. So who's going to stand in the gap? Well, nobody. And America is becoming a nation of lawlessness. In Chicago, just the past weekend, 40 people were shot. 11 of them died. And in 37 cities across the U.S., the murder rate is surging. So how did the Democrats' demand to defund the police escalate the crisis? And what is our president going to do about it? CBN White House correspondent Eric Phillips has more.
According to an ABC Washington Post poll recently released, just 38% of adults approve of how the president is handling crime in this country. It's a perception the administration is keenly aware of and a major reason why the president called together police chiefs, mayors, and other stakeholders for a meeting at the White House. Bullets have been flying with people dying at an increased rate across the country, starting in April of last year to this very moment, and it's ranged in scope. Sadly, just last month, 16-year-old standout high school student Cassius Conglay was shot to death in Northwest D.C. 2 months before, multiple people killed when a gunman opened fire at a supermarket in Boulder, Colorado. The list goes on. The president says his strategy has multiple prongs.
Our strategy provides including funding for law enforcement through the American Rescue Plan for states, cities, and to be able to hire police and pay them overtime in order to advance community policing.
So what you're seeing is an overall rough time for human beings in this world. And rough times have a tendency to express themselves in theft and substance abuse of all types and crime.
Mike Jones is a retired police chief and public safety expert who's been in policing for 45 years. He says the uptick is not surprising.
You have a really hot summer in a really crowded city that's afflicted with a lot of poverty, and what are you going to have? We've just got people who are taking advantage of lax enforcement, less police officers, and people who are more afraid to report.
Jones says with the pandemic leaving some 20 million people out of work and businesses closed, the tension of society's problems is escalating. Plus, there's another problem within policing ranks.
The problems with retention are the worst I've ever seen. The problems with recruiting are the worst I've ever seen.
The president saying more, not less, police are needed, and he hopes
some Democrats believe led to them underperforming, particularly in the House. So Democrats are aware that moving forward with a defund the police mantra is not the best way to go.
Eric Adams is New York's Democrat nominee for mayor. He's also a former police officer and a victim of police brutality in his youth.
The question is, as we mentioned in the meeting today, we spent too much time looking at the role the police play. The prerequisite to prosperity is public safety and justice. And if we don't have them both together, it doesn't matter how many police.
It's amazing the Democrats are trying to flip the narrative now to say, well, it was the Republicans that did it. No way, no how. Without question, they are the ones. In these city after city after city, the cry was, let's defund the police. Let's cut the police budget. Let's do away with these terrible oppressors. Let's do away with them. Well, they have found what is going to happen. As I told you at the beginning, they've sown the wind and they're reaping the whirlwind, and there's no way they can blame the Republicans for doing it. There's one bill that was not passed over a filibuster or something, and they think, well, that's the fault. No, it wasn't. City after city after city across the nation, the Democrats were saying, cut the police budget, cut the police budget, cut the police budget. And it's small wonder the police say, well, we are got to put our lives on the line. We're liable to get killed. We've got to go up against these criminals. And now you want to take away sovereign immunity from us so that we'll be sued in a lawsuit, and our money and property will be taken away from us if we arrest somebody. So they're not arresting people. And then, of course, you've got district attorneys who refuse to prosecute. You've got bail that is paid. You know, Kamala Harris actually was bailing people out of jail. She was paying to get them criminals back on the street. It's a shocking thing. And store after store is being looted. People, they're going in and just taking these businesses down, and the businesses are closing up, especially in the inner cities. I mean, it's incredible all across this great land of ours. Well, this has come out in another way. Down in Texas, you're under arrest. Well, what is that about? That's what Texas Governor Greg Abbott plans to tell the Democrat lawmakers who fled the state, I might add, in private jets, so they won't have to give a quorum on a very important election issue. And what are they doing now in Washington, D.C.? John Jessup has more.
That is right, Pat. Dozens of Texas Democrats fled the state to stall passage of a bill that tightens Texas's voting procedures, boarding a plane for Washington, D.C., trying to gain national attention for their cause. Republicans say the bill is needed for greater election security, while Democrats contend it's designed to deter minorities from voting. Texas Governor Greg Abbott is threatening to have the delinquent Democrats arrested when they return.
As soon as they come back in the state of Texas, they will be arrested. They will be cabined inside the Texas Capitol until they get their job done.
Now, it is unclear if the governor has the authority to arrest the legislators, although one poll shows 54% of Texans oppose lawmakers staging walkouts. President Biden is scheduled to speak today on the need for federal voting rights legislation as states across the country tighten their laws. Well, another setback for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The FDA preparing to announce a new warning related to a rare autoimmune disorder. However, with only about 100 incidents out of 12 million J&J shots, the risk is very low, and the agency says it's far better to get inoculated. Meanwhile, Pfizer officials are meeting with the FDA to discuss the possibility of adding a booster shot. And overseas, Israel is pressing forward with giving a third dose to some of its citizens. Pat, back to you.
Well, I must say, as far as the J&J vaccine, it was one dose. I've had it. Not one single twinge of a problem. And this so-called Guillain-Barré syndrome is very rare, and it has only appeared in a couple of cases. And we're not sure whether that is involved, that vaccine, but, oh man, COVID is a terrible thing, and you don't want to die from it. Well, you know, down in Nicaragua was one of the richest countries, had more oil, and had everything being destroyed by a man named Maduro. He has been, in turn, supported by Cuban troops. And without those Cubans, he couldn't stay in power. But now there's a protest going in Cuba that has finally gotten the attention of the White House. John has more on that one.
That is right, Pat. Police and security agents are patrolling city streets after the weekend uprising, leaving more than 100 people jailed. Here at home, the White House delivered its message Monday. America stands with the Cuban people. CBN's Jenna Browder has the story.
The people of Cuba are demanding change from their government over shortages of food and medicine made even worse by COVID-19. It's the largest anti-government protest in the history of the communist regime. Demands for freedom echoing across the island nation. Thousands taking to the streets in massive anti-government protests, the likes of which have not been seen in more than 60 years. Mostly peaceful, there were clashes with police and Cuban special forces. Police upping their presence to keep streets clear. Dr. Teo Baboon, a Cuban-American entrepreneur and philanthropist, tells CBN News he's not surprised. Dissent has been brewing in the church for months.
The evangelical community and the Catholic community begin to see a tremendous amount of publishing taking place in social media, demanding that the government pay attention to the tremendous amount of hurt that was taking place.
In a show of solidarity, about 5,000 flooded Miami streets near Little Havana. And in a statement, President Biden expressed support too.
The United States stands firmly with the people of Cuba as they assert their universal rights.
Dr. Baboon says now is the time for the Biden administration to take action.
They should start a dialogue with the Cuban government to stop them, to have them stop, or else further sanctions should be introduced against the Cuban government.
Senator Marco Rubio, who's of Cuban descent, wants the regime held accountable for decades of repression.
We have to make sure that their message today and every day moving forward isn't lost, and that the true nature of this barbaric regime is exposed.
And in an address to the nation, Cuba's president blamed U.S. policies and sanctions for the current crisis and said a social media campaign was fueling the protests. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thanks, Jenna. So much unrest. Pat, back to you.
Well, Fidel is dead, as you know. His brother took over. His brother's an old man. And the Cuban government has been one of repression, of killings, of torture, of imprisonment of their dissidents. And, you know, some years ago, Fidel was hailed in New York as being a liberator. Then it turned out he was a hardcore communist. And I think what's happening in Cuba, we need something more than just a message of solidarity, a message of support. It would be very nice if there are forces in Cuba that could bring forth some kind of a revolution, to slip a few guns and bullets in there to help them. I think they wouldn't take much, and the army would fall away, and I think Cuba would be free. And the next target should be Maduro in Venezuela, who's being supported by the Cubans. So I think the fact that we've got 90 miles to our south, we've got that hotbed of evil, I think it's time to see it wiped out. And let's hope somebody somewhere will get with it.